we were looking at is, now we've recruited, how do we retain? And our participants were myself, Michael, Nephew. I was the initiator of the topic, but also we had Lindsay, Lowell, and Margaret, Petrochenkov. And what we talked about was in retention, how do you define retention? You know, if they move from one science field to another science field, they're still retained in the sciences. But the one who would look at them as not being retained and the other would look at them as a new one. But they're still in the science field. So what is retention? And one thing to look at was to improve the selection and admission process. You know, look at things that involved in that. We talked about balancing the supply and demand, you know, gearing it toward where there is the actual need. Because in some of the fields there's an overabundance, in some of the more specialized fields there's not, but there's enough scientists, just not necessarily where we need them. And we talked about rather than getting a mass of people into the sciences field and then having a killer course to weed them out, you know, just no gateway killer courses, but, you know, actually train them in it as opposed to weed them all out. And we talked about developing a broad knowledge before specialization. Getting not necessarily just a broad science knowledge, but even a broad interdisciplinary knowledge like you were talking about.
Right, so that works right into what we were talking about for recruiting is it doesn't have to be a science class to teach them a scientific method and thought.
Exactly. And so you were talking about the same things we were, and that keeps your retention there. We talked about incorporating a cultural understanding in pedagogy. That's a big issue. For one, while they're in their studies, there may be cultural issues that they have to deal with, and having an understanding of that would work. And you know, another thing that you talked about too, fostering teamwork and community, not just community within the science field, but community where they are. Especially with a lot of the minority cultures, they come from community-based people. And so that's what sometimes gets them out of the sciences, because they don't have that sense of community. So they're developing a sense of community for them. And also preparing for business, including non-technical skills. And that's another aspect that you touched on, all those other aspects you need to function in the business world. It's not just science when you're out in the business world.
Yeah. Can I ask you to go back and explain a little more what you mean understanding pedagogy?
Understanding in the pedagogy.
Oh, okay.
The pedagogy has an understanding of incorporating the cultural understanding.
I see.
So that if there's a cultural issue with minority students, they may have a cultural issue that they have to deal with, and we pull them out of a study of a class for a little bit.
Yeah.
And there has to be that understanding of that culture is what makes that person the person they are, and incorporating it in. And you know, for me, where I work now, incorporates an understanding of that. You know, and a lot of schools may not necessarily have that understanding, that incorporation of cultural understanding.